Hello, everyone who is able to join us tonight as we talk about embodiment in our deep dive for this month, October. And some of you are just going to be listening to this in a recording because it was not convenient for you to come tonight. So we're glad you're going to take the time to listen to the recording as well. Talking about embodiment is important for so many reasons, but we do have a couple of our wonderful LiveWell guides who are here to share a little bit about it tonight too, because almost everything we do in our wellness classes includes a practice of embodiment. I think a reason a lot of people start to feel, um, maybe even reach out for help is because they don't understand what's happening in their body mind connection. They're feeling lost, they're feeling disconnected, all sorts of, I guess, areas that come from not living a life where you're being embodied. And I guess as I was thinking about it tonight and preparing, even though I'm off to a stumbling start, I was thinking about all the messages that maybe we get from society that lead us to be disembodied. So, if you think about messages that you've picked up along the way, a couple that I've just grabbed, and y'all may think of some others, like we hear things like toughen up or tough it out or suck it up, buttercup was one that I thought of, or, brush it off, ignore it, it'll go away, fake it till you make it. There's a lot of messaging that maybe we hear in society or that we picked up along the way, either in how we were parented or how we were coached if we played sports, or how we were maybe messages we got from teachers in school, sit down, shut up. All those are examples of kind of stomping out what's going on inside of you, shutting down your voice, shutting down the pain, shutting down any discomfort, not listening to it. And so when you do that over time, you really begin to separate from maybe your body. You begin to not use your voice so long, you just don't even want to ever speak up. So a lot of things that just culturally happen and that happen in our early programming, I think, begin to lead us towards this way of living disembodied. And so if we are fortunate enough to have an opportunity to really face something that makes us kind of have to deal with it, sometimes that's a chronic health problem that really escalates. Maybe it was below the surface and we ignored it and ignored it. And now it's hurting so bad, or it's showing up in so many ways we can't ignore it any longer. Um, Different things happen that make us have to really evaluate, am I even in my body or listening to my body? You talk about people, you'll hear people say, or may experience yourself, where like you're on autopilot, you get home and you're like, how did I even get here? Weren't even paying attention. You weren't even in the moment. And we're just on autopilot so much that we just tune out. You hear about dissociation or disconnection or depersonalization, all these terms for I'm not even knowing what's happening in me. This happens with a lot of disorders. Talk about eating disorders, where maybe you got negative messaging growing up about gaining too much weight. And so you shut down your hunger cues and you don't even hear your hunger anymore. Often in trauma, if people have experienced trauma, you had to ignore what was happening because it was too intolerable to talk, to handle. And so you shut down even listening to it, not feeling the pain or not experiencing it. So many ways that this disembodiment originates and then begins to escalate and show up in ways that we have to ultimately deal with it if we want to have a full life where we are present and healthy and able to connect with others. Being able to connect with ourselves first is kind of a primary ingredient for then being able to connect with others. Because if we're so disconnected from ourselves, we're not in tune with ourselves, it's really hard to live open-heartedly and connect and love someone else if we're not even connecting and present and loving ourselves. So for those reasons, I think it's why this is a really important topic to talk more about and learn more about. And so, as we share tonight, I guess just think about how this may happen in your life. I know a metaphor that I came to me when I was just prepping my notes is, we all have systems. We have bodies that have signals that warn us that we ignore. I just talked about some hunger cues or pain. Um, think about driving your car. And I was thinking about the brake system of your car. We have brake pads that start to make a noise when it begins to, they wear down to a certain degree and they begin to make a noise to let us know we need to replace our brake pads. And if you don't listen to that noise and you just continue driving and saying, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, I'm ignoring it, I'm not paying attention, I got more to do, then it gets into the rotors, I think, if I'm getting my car parts right. And then you go get your brake pads changed, and they're like, oh, you're going to need rotors too because you went too long and you didn't replace these before. Now we're going to have to replace more. It's done more damage. Let's say you ignore that and ultimately hear people talking about their brakes going out on their car. I mean, your brakes don't just go out without these warning signs and these stages that are there to say, hey, tend to this. Hey, tend to this. And I mean, just like if we ignored that in our car and had a worse problem, when we ignore things going on in our body, you may hear somebody say, my back went out. Well, I mean, did that just happen overnight? Or was there a chronic misuse and ignoring of the signals that you really needed to take better care or get better rest or do better stretching? Thinking about maybe places where you've ignored some stuff that bubbled up and became a worse issue that now required more attention and could have been maybe addressed earlier if you had been listening. So tonight we're going to talk about listening to our body, how to be more connected, and that's where I'm coming from, at least in this. So just wondering if either of you other LiveWell guides joining us tonight have some comments about where you come from when you think about this moving from being disembodied to becoming embodied in how you live life.
Diane, do you want to go first? Diane's just listening.
I was. I remember something. I'm not sure if I'm going to get the writer correct. I think it's James Joyce who wrote, he lived a short distance from his body. Lived a short distance from his body. And sometimes I think of that, especially as I'm starting a class, like how people got there and how to connect them. And of course I frequently go to the breath as the way in, but that expression always just cracks me up a little bit because I think sometimes we're not connected.
Yes,
I love that. Erin, you were starting off talking about coaches and all this messaging from outside of us, and that was bringing up for me the word that was coming up for me was just shame, because on the one hand we're taught to discipline our way out of feelings or toward whatever the fitness goal or the athletic goal or whatever, different in those different ways. But there are so many other cultural messages that just cause us so much shame about connecting with our bodies, whether and even selfishness. It's sort of thought to be selfish to connect with your I don't know, just even the physical sensations that we have. Some of them we are ashamed of, and some of them we just feel selfish to turn our attention toward ourselves. And that in my yoga classes, I'm always talking about Maitri, the idea of befriending the self. And when we do mindfulness stuff, just like Diane said, of course, the breath is such an I don't want to call it easy, but that's our go-to to get back into the body. But thinking about coming home to yourself through all of that means, in part, just turning your gaze toward those things, even if there is shame there or whatever. There's really only I'm not I feel like I'm not being very articulate, but there's really only kind of that part of the process, that
Yeah.
mindfulness and just what sensations you have in a really elementary way that brings you back to honoring whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were at the retreat this weekend, Diane, we did a contemplative walk, and she, in one of the stops, had us put a hand on one of the areas of our body that we either felt discomfort about or had a history of pain or experience with. And as I was doing the exercise, I thought, I need more arms. I thought, and then my second thought was, who's seeing everywhere where I want to put a hand, like, because we're in this collective group, and it's like, you begin to have this shame around, what area am I insecure or uncomfortable or experiencing discomfort with? And, oh, I don't want anybody to know what that is, and it's just, I think because we have that indoctrination to, um, you know, look okay, be okay, pretend you're okay. And we all know, I mean, I know I've witnessed, people in my family live their life this way. That's how it seemed we do, especially here in the South, where it's a lot of times, you take care of yourself last, you listen to yourself last, you tend to everything else first. Those of us who have, lived in, when we've worked in, when you're in a professional setting, you kind of have to ignore what, maybe you're sick and you're still teaching a class, or you're still in a session, or you got all these aches or pains or discomforts, and you're just grinding it out. I mean, this grindish culture of like, just don't care or don't pay attention, and then it'll go away. And I think that practice of leaning in, tending to yourself, it's like we've been taught to look away. And so, as you were talking about, actually, that looking in is not comfortable. I think that whole, we talk a lot about having to sit with discomfort. And I was looking at, oh shoot, I didn't bring it in here. I was looking at Gabby Bernstein's deck of cards before we started, and I was like, just trying to see what card it is. And something about, personal growth is only built on sitting with discomfort or amid discomfort. And, if we're not paying attention, we're not growing. And so these practices of embodiment are just really essential if you're trying to do any work on yourself. I was in a session, some of you have heard of EMDR, and one of the questions when you're doing EMDR work is you have to ask what you're noticing in your body about this. And to me, that's embodiment. An example, I was doing this with a client, and it's something that had happened to her we were working on. She's like, it's like when I did therapy before, it was as if it was in this box and we were looking at it. And she's like, doing EMDR, it's like I climbed in the box and was it. And I'm like, that's what embodiment is, where it's not just, we're actually experiencing what it's like to be ourselves with whatever that discomfort is, of whatever our experience or story is.
Isn't that amazing? It reminds me so much that, like, think we're always talking about the body keeps the score, but just that there's so much stored there. And it's almost that there's so much there that you're just afraid. Like, you're just, what if I dive in there and I don't come back out? Like, it can be so scary, I think, to take that. EMDR is a great example of that. That was something that I was thinking about ahead of this talk too. Just the reconnection. There's almost like an intimidation around doing that. Or I see in yoga classes, I'm sure Diane does, people who really just don't want to. And you see this in your practice all the time, the resistance to just, because if you can keep it up in your head, you feel like you can control it, but you know that what's stored in your body is beyond your your comprehension. Maybe that's why it's so scary.
Yes, when you think of the all of our issues and our tissues, that's used a lot in the yoga language, and we have so many cells and we hold so much. I mean, if you think about, I mean, I know our brains are really complicated, and even though they're smaller than our whole body, they do a lot more. But when you think about all the areas where you hold in your cells, experiences, emotions, and things, and as you know, you'll sit down with somebody, talk about something, and it's not an appropriate time to cry. And they'll say, I can't talk about that right now. I'll get upset. And as you said, it's as if I get upset, I'm never going to stop being able to be upset, like it's going to be this lifelong change because I got upset. But I mean, there is so much fear of that. And you all know this. And when you're teaching a yoga class or a meditation, I hear people all the time, I can't meditate because the stuff comes up. If I sit still, it comes up. And how many times have you experienced someone in that yoga class? I mean, myself included. I heard you talking about this other day, Ashley, right at the end, you just got tears coming down because you sat still and you felt what needed to be felt. And that might have meant you actually released some tears or, process through something, some disturbance. Becky, I see your hand up, and we are recording. As long as you're okay with your question being recorded, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry for background noise, but I wanted to share something exactly to that point that Ashley brought up about being afraid to look, being afraid to face the feelings and that stored emotion that's in your body. I found a really cool quote from Khalil Gibran that he says, many of us spend our whole lives running from feelings with the mistaken belief that you cannot bear the pain. But you have already borne the pain. What you have not done is feel all you are beyond that pain.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to share that.
Yes, so true. It's already happened. You already went through it. And yet we fear returning to that because of how uncomfortable it was, right? We don't want to go back to it. We already know how terrible, especially if we're talking about trauma, but something we haven't felt yet. That's another thing. But if it's something we've already been through, yes, you've already experienced it. And you have so much more wisdom when you go back in to do healing work to tend to that old wound. But,
I think the irony of the process to what you're saying is that you can't really get on the other side of it until you get, there's no way around but through, or whatever that expression is. It's like, I mean, I still re-encounter this all the time. It's just, it lives there, whether you're acknowledging it or not. And there's not any way to get around it or stuff it that way. You have to go there. But I love that quote so much because it also acknowledges that, like, for whatever pain lives there, there's 50 other things living there too, and lots of them are good.
Yes.
But you're not even attuned to that. Like, you're not attuned to any of it, neither the good nor the bad nor the hopeful. As long as you're divorced from the body and all up in the mind, which I relate to really hard, then you're not experiencing the spectrum of things. Because it is hopeful, isn't it? I mean, the goal of befriending yourself and starting to honor all these things is not only to move through them, to experience the pain, to process it, but also just to continue the process of getting to know yourself. And you're so beautiful and worth getting to know, not only mentally.
Yeah, and I think it just, at least for my own experience, it's like one of the bravest things that you can do is to face what you've experienced, face, all of that pain, and be open to everything that comes up, the good, the bad, everything, And that, so like the healing process, just, I feel like it is a brave journey.
It's so brave. But you get to see yourself being brave. That's the payoff. Like, I mean, we all know who've all had trauma that some days are better than others, obviously, but like when you do have those days, and of course they come up when you feel like you did brave a thing and you're on some version of another side of it, even if it's only temporary. There's pride in that. It's just like when your little kid like hurts themselves and you dust them off and they get up and they get the memory of the pain and then the rising afterward, like Glennon Doyle talks about.
Yes. I think about my favorite EMDR instructor who the little phrase of we must feel to deal with it to heal. So, I mean, I just always think the feel has to come before the deal, before the heal. And it does require such bravery to sit with those feelings that come up around pain and discomfort.
And sometimes the body shows us things that we need to be dealing with. And sometimes it starts as a whisper. And then if you don't, then it pretty soon is shouting at you. Many years ago, I was going through a breakup, and I was having this band of pain across my back, and to the point where I was starting to feel like I couldn't breathe, and it was getting really serious. And I was doing movement to like get movement and like massages, going to the chiropractor for this back problem. And I don't know how I came to it. I wish I could remember, but I realized it was my broken heart that hurt. And I had kind of curled in around it. And when I started to, not think that it was my back, but that it was about kind of getting my heart open again, and I started moving like that, miraculously, that band of pain did go away.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of those stories, Ashley, you have been on me about reading Goddesses Never Age, which has just, I put it off for 2 years and now it's blowing me away. But she talks about a lot of the physical ailment stuff, but it made me think about frozen shoulder. I know you've dealt with that. We've seen several people in yoga who have dealt with that, and talk about, did you deal with that maybe, or is that Diamecus? I'm
Me?
getting
No,
everybody
yeah,
mixed up.
I've got a very light case.
But it's so common, and we think about when we think about those kind of conditions, the back pains, the chest pains, the other things, you brought up at our last deep dive, rain. And I guess when I was thinking about the rain meditation today came up to me when I was thinking about this, because I was like, that's really what she's saying in that rain is to like really recognize, allow, and investigate and nurture. So if it's that shoulder pain or that back pain, and we're doing that meditation, how do we really recognize what hurts, allow space for it, investigate a little more what's going on with it, and really try to figure out that nurture piece of what do you need. But I mean, part of that is listening to the body. What are you telling me? And so often, like you mentioned in the back pain, it was the protection of the heart. I think for a lot of times people, it's they weren't safe to move in a way that they wanted to move when something happened, and so that bracing or that paralysis or that fear, fight, flight, freeze signal really stores, in areas, jaw, shoulders, or hips places. We talk so much in yoga about hip openers because all of the, data, research, whatever you want to call it, talking about how we store the emotions in our hips and they need to be opened up and released. I mean, so much, the psoas muscles, all these different areas that we target because of the chronic fight, flight, freeze, or bracing that really begins to debilitate those parts of our body that need our attention.
Mhm. Can we take a gentle turn? Something that came up for me when you were talking about rain, or maybe it was something Bethany said, not Bethany, Becky, sorry, said. I was thinking about, because a lot of people who listen to and come to yoga have kids. And one of the things that I've found really interesting is working out ideas around embodiment with our kids.
Mm.
You know, and I'm curious if you guys have had, you know, experience exposing people to that idea. One of the things that I've done with my kids is try to get them to tune in with what's going on in their body or their reaction to something that happens there as opposed to just in their brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been my kids are teenagers now, but it's been kind of an interesting process to sort of tap them into that, because obviously most of us weren't, I don't know, trained that way or taught anything about that when we were young. But do you ever see that or talk about that with your clients? Or
I know for me, I do with my son, and I notice how uncomfortable I am, you know, much more early when he was doing sports. I'm more accustomed to it now. But if he would say, my ankle hurts, I can't play today. I mean, that didn't feel like it was something I could have said growing up. So it almost feels like scary. Like, should you say that? Should you do that? Is it okay? Is the coach going to be mad? You know, but like he listens to his body and will tell me, I listen to my body. If it doesn't feel like it can compete, it can't compete. I'm not going to just ignore it and make it worse. I mean, all the things that I say to people to do, but it didn't feel like I could do that. And so it surprises me when I hear him do that. And I'm like, good for you. But the child, Aaron, is like, is that okay? Can you do that? But I mean, it lets me know I'm part of that message, and I'm glad I did. But it is, I think, so important to teach young, to teach the breath. I know, Becky, you do that with your kids, teaching them, you know, body regulation, and Takesha, you too. Yeah.
I
Takesha.
think with having a 2-year-old and what you just said about your son, it's just like the babies don't have to be taught. They come into this world knowing to listen and be in their bodies, and it's the unlearning that we have to do and not putting that on them that really is where the work is at, because it's all these messages that we receive and all these experiences that we have, and it blows my mind to see my 2-year-old and how much she can know what's going on with her and how much she just follows that. Like if I don't come in and interrupt it, then like we come here knowing how to be in our bodies and trust our bodies, and I think it's just amazing.
that's such a good point. Such a good point. Because whenever I see a toddler, I've been seeing a lot of toddlers lately, hearing a lot of toddlers lately, as we do. And I've been thinking when I'm around them, now that I don't have any, because that wasn't my favorite stage. But when there are other people's, then I'm like, oh, that's so amazing. The way that they, you know, whatever they're feeling is, like you were saying, Takesha, like if it's happening out in the world, and there's no inhibition around it. And there's no, like, you're right, we're unlearning what was innate for us.
And I think that's the point. We didn't have inhibitions either when we were toddlers until we were told all the messages about it. And so when you do inner child work yourself or with people, you see, oh, when I was 0, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, that was shut down in me. And now I don't experience playful joy. I mean, think about how many adults have such a hard time with play and with joy. And it's like, that is the 2-year-old in us that can, you know, and when we're told when that's not, I don't know, when there's not space for that, you hear a lot of people talk about shrinking theirself or being small, not taking up enough room. That's why in yoga, we open those poses up and take up as much room as you can. Hopefully we got generations coming up now that aren't afraid to take up their place in this world and aren't afraid to use their voice because they're being raised by people with more awareness about embodiment. And yeah. What else, ladies and gentlemen and people that are here?
I have a question that I think maybe some people might be wondering. I'll be the one that always has the questions, but what if you feel like you don't even really know what's happening in your body? Because I think a lot of people who are starting to be on this embodiment journey are like, how do I even, like, where do I start? I've been checked out for so long that I don't even know what to do first.
I want to, Erin, you have more to say about this, and Diane, you probably have plenty to say about this too, but I can speak to this from the perspective of somebody who was very, very disembodied. Like when I first started coming into therapy and doing some work around it, I couldn't tell. I had a lot of dissociation, and there were a lot of times when I would, a therapist or a yoga class would try and put me in touch with whatever was going on inside my body, and I would feel nothing. And or they would say, see where you feel joy or love or safety or any of those things, and I would feel nothing. And so I also want to acknowledge that when you feel nothing, that's information. Like, how important is that you even just sat and took the moment? Over time, I think just lending an ear, or whatever the metaphor is you want to use, to what's going on, your body could be shy about it, and it's just showing up until maybe there's some glimmer. Like for me, it started as just little glimmers, and I wouldn't know how to label them or what they even were, but it's also fine if nothing's there, but I think Erin probably can speak better to something more specific than that, but I didn't want that to get overlooked, because if people are really disembodied, that can be kind of heartbreaking to feel like you're failing at it or something.
Yeah, I see it all the time, and I was definitely thinking, Diane, I know you've got some words too I want to hear, but that being curious, the 7 tenets of mindfulness that can guide us through everything. It's like it just starts with being curious. And like you just said, Ashley, lending the ear. Even if you don't hear anything, I care enough that I'm going to sit down with my body 5 minutes, either in meditation, or I'm going to go to the therapy session or whatever, the yoga class, and I'm going to give my body some attention so that it can begin to feel safe enough to reveal. I always use a metaphor a lot. Y'all may have heard me say this, where it's like if there was someone who had hidden in a cave for 15 years, a kid that was, not cared for or raised, and you went to the cave door and said, hey, come out, I've got food for you. They wouldn't just run out and eat the food. Like initially, you may have to put the food outside, and then they come, and then they go back, and then they come and they go back, or animal, whatever it fits for that. Like you have to show up, you have to, convince, even coerce, like it is safe, it's okay. Like it's here if you want to come out. And I think that's what we do with our bodies. That showing up with curiosity and the attention over time lets all the cells in our body know, hey, I think she's for real. She really wants us to reveal what we're feeling, but we almost, because you've been so headstrong about it, you have to convince your body that it's safe, that you can tolerate it, and that you can deal with whatever it wants to tell you. Because the only thing you've told it all these years is, I don't want to hear from you. And if you're ignored that long, nobody wants to speak to you. And that's all these cells. They don't want to speak up because you've told them they don't matter. So why do I want to speak up if I've been told I don't matter? So that attention and that curiosity and that time is really over time, I think, letting our body be safe enough to feel so that we can listen, because it doesn't trust us. And why should it?
I think there is some fluency there too. Like you're saying, you've shut it down for so long, and then you start suddenly being like, okay, I'm here, why isn't anything happening? But I would also say that over time, now I can drop into my body at the drop of a hat. Like in any given moment, I'm like, oh, where am I feeling this? Because I'm used to it now. It's almost reflexive, and I can pinpoint I don't always know what they mean or something, but I can pinpoint the physical sensations associated with different things just so easily. It's hard for me almost to remember having been on the side where it was dead silent, and the silence lasted a long, long time for me.
I think another way in is through the senses. So if you can, if you can get quiet and observe, the things we more commonly might come in contact with. What do you feel? What are you, sensing, touching? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you smelling? Use that as another way in. And then you might start to get a little vibe about something. I think also where I know I can get caught up is trying to label what is it that I'm feeling and make it very precise. Like, oh, that's joy right there, a modicum of joy, or that's grief, or whatever it is, and so I can get caught up in that instead of just, what does it feel like? Where is it, and what does it feel like? But I have found that it's helpful to find a way in through the body and what you're picking up through other senses, and then you start getting into, can you feel your heartbeat? Can you feel, coming again to the breath, can you feel temperature? And that might be a little safer as a starting point.
Yes, exploring the senses for sure. Also, I think about being around other living beings, whether that's being with another person, beginning to, I don't know, feel some sort of resonance off of that, or also in nature, just when you experience, when you do the contemplative mindful walk like we did or whatnot, and you begin to, be around other living beings, it can kind of wake up your body to being alive itself, to maybe where you begin to listen to things differently. A lot of our practices, like I said, that we do, grounding, connecting, the different ways to start to become, next month we're moving into presence, which is kind of the other, where you get to when you're becoming more embodied, is being able to be present. And I think a lot of this mindfulness, meditation, yoga, those are all embodiment practices, and will lead to more awareness over time. And when we think about the discomfort, how many times do you hear people say, I don't want to do that, I don't like, my hips are too tight, or I'm too inflexible, or it's like, that's why you show up for it. to listen to your body, to help your body become more flexible, more balanced, more able to tolerate discomfort, more able to recognize its cues of its breath or its hunger or its needs. These embodiment practices are essential. I think of the movie Inside Out. I'm sure most of you have seen it. When you see the little, sad, and you see the little joy. We have to go through the sad to experience the joy. If we shut down sad, we shut down joy. And if we want it, when you sit down with somebody and they say, I just don't feel any joy in my life. Well, when is the last time you cried? Because what else are you shutting down? If you open up that portal to feelings, you're going to feel them all, the pain and the pleasure. So instead of shutting down, or think about desire, we haven't even gotten into that. I mean, we shut down desire. We're shamed about desire. I mean, you're not feeling, you're not living, you know? So Becky, you raised your hand on that. No, you were saying I bet you were saying you've watched Inside Out. I think that's just such a good one for this understanding and expressing your emotions freely. Anybody? Yeah.
Love in our house. It's good
Yes.
for you. And, you know, back to the point about teaching our kids or helping our kids not develop these ignoring their emotions, ignoring their body. So Inside Out helps that discussion a lot, which is why I think, you know, therapists and school counselors love it. But also, you know, boys and girls need this. And I feel like there is a real, I mean, just looking at our own population statistics here, boys become men and men are not engaging as much in this important training that we're all doing of trying to listen to our bodies. And I guess I just wanted your opinion, and you know, some of your research probably has, you have information about this that I'm not aware of. I only know anecdotally that I don't see as many men engage in therapy, but I think it's so important. So what is your opinion on that, and how can we help improve that statistic?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you having 3 boys, that's a very important question. I only have one child and he is a boy, so same for me. And I just think it's that years of culture where men are not supposed to cry. You know, it's just the whole toughen up and don't show your emotion, generations upon generations upon generations passed down. I mean, weepy women have existed for years. So even if you were, you know, told, you know, you shouldn't get that upset or cry, there's at least some genetic, you know, we've had more emotions genetically expressed in female, I think, than male, where it has been shut down for more and more generations, with women being traditionally the caregiver and men being the hunter gatherer. I mean, so women are going to have, even though it might be hard for us, it's a little more intuitive to go with emotions than for men. And, you know, I think that, yes, Becky, it's so important to teach young, even though I'm a therapist and even though I talk about meditation and mindfulness, and I told you my son won't play hard if he's hurt and all that, but he still doesn't reflexively express emotion because his grandfather doesn't, his father doesn't easily, you know, so all the men that he sees don't. And so I think it definitely sets men up for a harder time to engage with their emotions and to prioritize these things. So I was, if anybody else has a comment about that, but I just seen a note that I wanted to read if we were getting towards our close here. But does anyone have any other comment about Becky's question on the, I know you have a son as well, Ashley, and
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would only say that that I see more curiosity around it now. That I feel like the lack is more apparent, not just from, I mean, I feel like the men that I'm exposed to in various ways feel that lack. Like they really, I'm around more men who have conversations around things like this than I think I would have been if it were like the 60s or the 70s or even the, you know, whatever, like a former decade. But I do, having a teenage son, I mean, mine is almost your age, your son's age, Aaron, but I don't have any practical advice for, I just keep talking about it. With teenagers, it's so hard to say, like, what will happen? I just don't know. Maybe
yeah.
it'll sink in, or at least there's no shame around.
Yeah,
stuff.
I think that's what's essential is you started out talking about shame when we began this, and yes, reducing the shame around any of your experiences, whatever's happening in your body, whatever's happening in your, desires, whatever's happening in your emotions, it's all okay. And, I think that reducing shame allows people to stay curious with listening. Um, we talk about self-compassion a lot, and one of the notes I had for this, and I just think it's a perfect 4 bullets, so I was just going to read them. That one of the ways of practicing embodiment is to develop self-compassion. Be kind and understanding to yourself, especially during challenging times. Practice self-compassionate affirmations and avoid self-criticism, nurturing a positive relationship with your body and emotions. Treat yourself with kindness and understanding. Acknowledge your feelings and bodily sensations without criticism. Body acceptance, meaning practice accepting your body as it is, engaging in positive affirmations, and challenge any negative self-talk about your body. I just think some of these basic things, if we're doing it and we're teaching it, then we're going to have generations where there is less shame and less avoidance and more self love and appreciation.
Mhm. It's hard. I mean, we are all bombarded with so much of the opposite messaging all the time. And I was thinking about our kids or thinking about raising boys or whatever it might be. And I feel sometimes like I'm one voice, but maybe even their dad isn't really on board with the kind of stuff we're talking about. I mean, so you can say it's at home, but that might not be true whether you're divorced or not. And then there's all the messaging from peers and teachers and coaches and all that. So I still think the exposure is so good. But we're all like talking about self-compassion. I mean, I think that also starts with just acknowledging that it's a wear out, being bombarded with all that negative talk. It gets in your head. And if you're not practicing affirmations for yourself, then you're not really able to concretely counterbalance the words, the language, the messaging that comes into your head from everywhere else. I mean, I think affirmations, you mentioned that a couple of times. I think they're so important.
Yes, they are.
You just
I mean,
repeat
it's
the positive.
it's the only way to strengthen that new pathway.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just telling somebody in session today, I mean, clearing trails out at Woodhaven, it's like if you clear the trail, you get the grass down, the weeds beaten down, you get all the bushes sticking out, beaten down, like you do all that, and you have to walk that trail or all year to keep it down. Otherwise, if you don't keep walking that trail, everything grows back. And it's as if you never did anything to start with. You're right back to how it was. And I mean, that's that default mode network of ours that we're going to go to, especially in times of stress. It's like, it's right there. It's right there waiting on us. That negative self talk, that old belief, that old language, it's all right there ready. And all of the new work we're doing, I mean, we have to reinforce it. And the affirmations are the easiest way to reinforce. What is it I want to believe about myself? And I have to say it long enough to where my brain doesn't kick it out when it hears it, and it's the rehearsal is so important.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel cheesy about affirmations in my own brain. I think this feels really silly, but it can be such a good survival mechanism. You'll really notice if you're doing them after a few minutes. It's like you could speak to this more than I can, but isn't the thing that your nervous system really doesn't know the difference? Like if you start saying, I am whatever, I am content or whatever the thing might be, like your body starts to listen, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Just like the negative message, even if you're beautiful, and you're told I'm ugly, you start believing that. So it's I mean, we believe what we hear over and over, good or bad. So we've heard enough of the bad. We need to give more of the good consistently to ourselves to get that positive pathway. I can't not say this. I looked at a closing thought I had that I hadn't mentioned, and maybe it's not as grand as I'm making it out to be, but if you relate to your body like a fussy baby you are trying to ignore, it will cry louder and longer to get your attention. Or it will shut down after realizing you are never going to give it the attention it deserves and desires. And I just think that we got to listen. We got to pay attention. Or we shut down, we shut out and we don't live full and free. So I'm glad that even though we have a small crowd here live, I know some people will be listening on a replay, and that requires even more commitment to take the time out of whatever day you're having to listen to why is it important to be there for me, and showing up, tuning in, listening are the ways to begin that. So thanks for taking the time to be there for you. And thank all you for being here. This was fun.
Thank you.
Our little podcast in the making. All right. Well, everyone have good nights, and welcome those of you who were here for the first time. Hope it was a treat, and we'll be back next month with gratitude and presence as we get into our Thanksgiving month. So see y'all then.
All right.
Thanks.